Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Szanowni Państwo, przypada mi zaszczyt
It's an honor for me.
otwarcia
It's an honor to open yet another conference.
wskazania na to, że nasze przedsięwzięcie, nasz
So
projekt,
our
który trwa już ponad
project has
20
continued
lat,
for over 20 years, and
w
we
nieco
do
zmienionej
continue
formule.
even though the formula has changed somewhat. So
Z jednej strony, jak Państwo
let's talk
widzą,
about this
nawet
year's
po
conference.
grafice,
On the one hand,
również po
when you look at the
tematyce,
layout and the
nawiązuje do
subject,
20-letniego projektu, którego
it actually references this 20-year-old project that was led by Bishop Pieronek, and we, his associates, decided to continue that. In 2021, we have somewhat modified that to extend the formula, and the main slogan sounds somewhat different. You can see it behind me, Christians of Europe in the face of... excuse me, the role of the Christians in the process of European integration, and Christians of Europe in the face of crises is the subject of this year's conference. And we will discuss that subject in our three panel sessions. Let me just say a few words to tell you about this transformation that we have undergone, namely the structure of the conference and the organization. So why have we done that? To have a bit of distance, to be more open and more friendly to our environment. Well, I'm not saying that it was not the case before, mind you. Yesterday we had this informal meeting on the names day of Bishop Pieronek, and the participants thought about the most important values of his: openness, courage, friendliness. So we organizers would like to we want to stand on our own feet, but that means that we need to be more brave, more courageous in our further discussions about Europe and the values and the politics, how they overlap these two worlds of the sacrum and the profanum, the profane and the sacred, and how these two worlds overlap. We have the Program Council. Now the organizing committee is made up of Jan Olbrycht on behalf of the EPP, Senator Anja Ron-Lipen on behalf of the Schumann Foundation Luxembourg, Mr. Misiek on behalf of the Committee, and myself on behalf of the main organizer, that is the Bishop Pieronek Foundation. So we have the special council that is responsible for the substance-related issues. There are 2-year terms, 2021-2023 is the first one. Jan Tombiński is its leader, and it makes up of Kajetan Gornik, Father Sowa, Agnieszka Wilk-Świstuń. They also are included there. The representative of the Pontifical University is not allowed to participate in the work of this council because the university decided not to participate. Also, there is this award. The new head of the award committee has been chosen. The board has selected that person. Mr. Olbrycht, an MEP, is going to head that, and he'll say a few words about that later, I guess. The other members of this council are those who have already been awarded: Madam Suchocka and Professor Okobutilione. And on behalf of the Bishop Pieronek Foundation, Mr. Rafał Utnik, which doesn't need any presentation, just a few words about him. It is thanks to his energy and competence this conference can even continue. So that's it. Let me now invite our guest, Dr. Jan Olbrycht, Mr. Halicki. They will open the conference, and then we will listen online to a speech by Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich.
Szanowni Państwo,
Ladies and gentlemen,
Ekscelencjo Księży Biskupie,
Your Excellence,
Pani Przewodnicząca,
Bishop,
Wiceprzewodnicząca
Madam President,
Parlamentu
the
Europejskiego.
Deputy President of the
Chciałem powiedzieć, że ten
European Parliament.
nowy etap naszego
Now we are beginning a new stage.
konferencji i ja tutaj reprezentuję
I'm talking about our project, our conference. I represent a fraction of the European Parliament, this group, the EPP, and our group, since the very conception, took up a task to be in intensive dialogue with churches and religious groups.
ten dialog rozpoczęła
So
polityczna, czyli
a political group started this dialogue. We call it a fraction in Polish. So it started even before Poland joined the EU, around 20 years ago. And it started by having conversation, a dialogue with the Orthodox Church. We, politicians that worked at the European Parliament at the time, we had a task. We were supposed to discuss things that are not, strictly speaking, theological in nature, but rather about challenges that are important for the process of the European integration.
dyskusji na temat
Naturally, strictly religious issues couldn't be avoided, that's for sure, but what we set out to do is to look for common stances, things that we shared, especially when it comes to those basic things, basic issues. Then things changed, and we included other groups, the Jewish community, the Muslim communities, and this dialogue has continued, and it is quite intensive. I mean, we have been doing so as a political group. One of our members
stanowisko wiceprzewodniczącej parlamentu.
has become the vice president of the parliament and does similar things. I'm talking about Roberta Metsola. She is with us.
Religijny, międzykulturowy
And this interreligious dialogue is something that she has been doing on the forum of the parliament itself. So our group, since Poland joined the EU, has decided to join in this initiative, those Kraków conferences. Since the very beginning, we as a group have been participating in that series of conferences. And by the way, we are very closely linked to the Schuman Foundation in Luxembourg, which, as you know, is the co-organizer and a co-financing partner of this conference. So that conference for us, for MEPs, is one of the flagship projects.
w sposób otwarty i zdecydowany
You can see that the political milieu is in very difficult talks at time with churches and religious communities. Difficult, I use this word. I do not mean that they are difficult when we are having conversations with Christian churches, but rather when we are having such dialogue with Muslim countries.
naszej poważnych rozmów.
Now, we've had those serious talks in our group, and we talked about what our identity is today, because our identity is linked to Christian democracy. This is a very interesting conversation. Christian democracy, what does it mean today? Those who have been with us for long know that we have actually discussed this subject at our conferences. So on behalf of the EPP at this point, I would like to thank you. The form has changed. It's been redone, but we can still continue to participate as MEPs. We can co-build, co-shape this project, and it is something that is needed for the political circles, but not only, because we're talking about a major, serious conversation about Europe as it is today, about the threats and challenges and risks that are out there. This type of debate is very much needed. So, from this place, let me say that we are grateful that we can co-participate in this project, and let me declare that irrespectively of what is going to happen outside, we're going to stick to it and continue our efforts. Thank you.
Szanowni Państwo, witam serdecznie.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Za zaproszenie. To drugi raz
welcome. Thank you for
razem z Państwem.
the invitation. It's the second time that I can be here in Kraków with you. I remember the first time there were some question marks about whether this dialogue can continue or not. A dialogue that is very much needed. The word crisis can be found in the very title. So there is the world of laity and our Christian communities. This dialogue is also in crisis. So the crisis has impacted ourselves too. So this appeal to continue, despite the pandemic, has been picked up. So congratulations to the organizing committee, to you. It's absolutely fantastic that this project can continue. After all, it's very important, especially in that moment. Speaking of crisis, let me reflect on that. There is the migration crisis and there is humanitarian crisis on the borders. And the future of Europe today is discussed as a major economic and political challenge. There is this health crisis. It's not only about COVID. There are other challenges. We're combating cancer and other issues. You've got the climate crisis and the energy crisis, gas and oil. These challenges are ahead of us. We are facing them, rather. And we have been known that when the times got tough, we kept going. We were known for that in the EU. Tear down this wall, Mr. Gorbachev. Words were said in Berlin, but the answer to that came from Poland. Solidarity, this movement which gave identity and freedom as those joined values. It gave space to others, but also it shaped itself, certain identity. We knew what kind of Europe we were fighting for, without wars, without borders, full of respect for other human beings. And even these values are questioned because we have a lot of difficulty in our human-to-human relations. And there are a number of crises, but there is this one answer that you know full well. I've already mentioned that solidarity is the answer. So we would like to, or rather, where would we be if we hadn't bought vaccines together? Where would we be if we didn't share certain values when it comes to our European security? That's the future, I believe. We need to renew this sense of solidarity. And this is what we have been asking to have in the European Parliament. But it is something that needs to be cherished everywhere. And the President of the European Parliament is with us, a friend of Poland, and a person who cherishes these values, who quotes them every day. So I will say a few words that are going to be private in nature. Jerzy Janiszewski once has painted this solidarity sign, and he gave me this graphics, screen printed. So basically, it's a reference of this to this old symbol, but it is also included in the challenges today. So I would like, Madam President, to return to the Parliament with this message, namely that the solidarity, broadly speaking, can be picked up, but also won soon. May I have this token?
Także w imieniu polskiej delegacji
Also on behalf of the Polish delegation, and I believe all of us as we are here, I would like the symbol to be there
w najbliższym czasie
to accompany our talks. So I wish you a fruitful conference. Roberta will be one of our panelists. And now we will have soon a discussion. Please stay with us. Thank you.
Dear Excellencies, dear participants, dear friends, I am very pleased as President of Kościół to greet you at the beginning of the International Conference on the Role of Christians in the Process of European Integration. Even if this is the first conference in a new series of meetings, it builds upon the significant legacy of international conferences hosted by Bishop Tadeusz Pironek of Krakow since 2001. I wish to express my sincere gratitude to the foundation carrying his name, the Tadeusz Pironek Foundation, as well as to the other conference partners for taking forward the task of promoting Christian values in contemporary Europe by cherishing this important space for dialogue between politics, academia, media, and the Church. This year's conference carries the title Christians of Europe in the Face of Crisis, discussing the value system crisis, the crisis of representative democracy, as well as the climate change crisis and its consequences for humanity. Hearing the word crisis and reflecting on the role of Christians makes me think of the letter to Diognetus, an early Christian work whose author states that what the soul is to the body, Christians are to the world. This is, I think, precisely the vocation of Christians in today's European societies that are confronted with these multiple crises. As Pope Francis recalled at the Rethinking Europe dialogue organized by Kościół and the Holy See Secretariat of State in October 17, in our day, Christians are called to revitalize Europe and to revive its conscience, not by occupying spaces, but by generating processes capable of awakening new energies in society. The role of Christians as bearers of hope is all the more pertinent in the context of the pandemic we are now experiencing. Whereas many people in Europe may look to their future with uncertainty, others continue to look to Europe with hope, relying on it as a source of development and a promise of peace in the world and to humanity. A great prophet of hope, St. John Paul II, calls in his apostolic exhortation Ecclesia in Europa for a rediscovery of Europe's true identity. To give new impetus to its own history, Europe must recognize and reclaim with creative fidelity those fundamental values acquired through a decisive contribution of Christianity, which can be summarized in the affirmation of the transcendent dignity of the human person, the value of reason, freedom, democracy, the constitutional state, and the distinction between political life and religion. In the present social, political, and cultural context, We are, however, often experiencing what Pope Benedict XVI used to refer to as the relativization of truth, which also applies to our understanding of values. Accelerated with the technological progress and its implications for human relations and the relationship with reality, such a relativization of values tends to expose them to the influence of various ideologies, filling them with contents that are increasingly likely to come into conflict with one another. Being confronted with tendencies to reduce or change the meaning of the values that inspire the foundation of the European project, Christians are called to contribute to a solidification of the value system, to make it again an unambiguous reference framework that provides clear guidance to policies and actions in a rapidly changing world. Even if, with the ongoing conference on the future of Europe, we are all asked to look to our future, Europe cannot ignore the Judeo-Christian roots and needs to acknowledge that the founding values of the Union are the fruit of a historical process with contributions from political, cultural, and also religious traditions of our continent. Without memory, there is no future. In order to live faithfully to these values also today and in the future, Pope Francis reminds us that perhaps the greatest contribution that Christians can make to today's Europe is to remind her that she's not a mass of statistics or institutions, but is made up of people. Sadly, we see how frequently issues get reduced to discussions about numbers. There are no citizens, only votes. There are no migrants, only quotas. There are no workers, only economic markers. There are no poor, only thresholds of poverty. In this respect, the COVID-19 pandemic is a good opportunity for politics and society to rediscover the centrality of the human dignity of each person. Christians may also bring hope in reinvigorating a true experience of democracy. Nowadays, the exercise of democracy often tends to be reduced to mere right to vote, rather than to the possibility of actively contributing to the building up of a genuine community in view of the common good. Unfortunately, also in Europe, we are witnessing tendencies towards futile antagonisms that aim to polarize and divide our societies. To provide an antidote to these realities, Pope Francis encourages us that as Christians, we are called to promote political dialogue, especially where it is threatened and where conflict seems to prevail. Christians are called to restore dignity in politics and to view politics as a lofty service to the common good, not a platform for power. In a few days' time, a key political event for humanity's future will take place in Glasgow, the 26th UN Climate Change Summit, COP26, that aims to accelerate actions towards the goals of the Paris Agreement. The climate crisis is yet another challenge where Christians, together with other religious communities, can offer hope. Sharing the same concern for creation, Pope Francis, together with the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, Archbishop Justin Welby, and other faith leaders, issued an urgent appeal to take a better care for the human family and for the environment in which it lives. In their joint statement, leaders representing the world's major religious traditions underlined that multiple crises facing humanity are ultimately linked to a crisis of values, ethical and spiritual. We are caretakers of the natural environment with a vocation to care for it for future generations and the moral obligation to cooperate in the healing of the planet. We must address these challenges using the knowledge of science and the wisdom of religion. Let me conclude by referring to 4 dreams and hopes of Pope Francis for Europe, which he expressed in a letter to Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of Comice last year. Pope Francis dreams of a Europe that is a friend to each and all, and is respectful of the intrinsic dignity of each human person. He dreams of a Europe that is family and community, living in unity and treasuring differences. He also dreams of a Europe that is inclusive and generous, welcoming and hospitable, abiding by the virtue of charity and the principle of solidarity. And Pope Francis dreams of a Europe marked by a healthy secularism, where God and Caesar remain distinct but not opposed, a land open to transcendence. These are the hopes of Pope Francis for Europe. As Christians, each one of us, according to his or her own specific mission and call, ought to serve as a leaven in reviving Europe's memory and generating processes that lead to the future we dream for our continent. I wish that also this year's international conference in Krakow may contribute to this important process. Thank you very much. God's blessing upon your work, and have a nice meeting.
Dzień dobry Państwu.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. After this introductory session, we are going to move to session 1 of our conference. We have divided the crisis into 3 different elements, and the first we would like to focus on is the crisis of value systems and the contemporary vision of human beings. We've been thinking about who could help us not only to analyze and discuss crises, but also to show perhaps their importance, to show perhaps what can be taken out of those crises. And we thought that the best speaker here might be Tomasz Halik. I think there is no need actually to introduce Priest Halik. He's author of a number of books that have been translated into Polish, very popular also in this country. Reverend Professor Tomasz Halik is one of those, I think, members of the Church who can, with a full theological, psychological, philosophical rigor, just to mention a few of the areas he is expert in,
dealing on an everyday basis. I think he can, from those different perspectives, present to us a very good lesson that can be drawn for the future, I think, from the current crisis. And thank you very much, Reverend Professor. Thank you very much for visiting us here.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, thank you very much for inviting me. The crisis of value system, the contemporary vision of the human person. This is the topic for 2 semesters of lectures. Here I can only present a few brief theses. First, every crisis is an opportunity for transformation. This thesis contains 3 important theological concepts: crisis, kairos, and metanoia. The word crisis, like the words critic and criterion, is derived from the verb krinein. It means judgment, separation, selection, evaluation, discernment. Kairos means time of opportunity. I call the theological methods I use in my books kairology, a theological hermeneutics of change in society and culture. In other words, it is an effort to discern the signs of the times, to use the Jesuit method of spiritual discernment to spiritually diagnosis of our time. Metanoia is a transformation, a conversion, a repentance, a change of direction, a change of vision, a reorientation of life. These 3 concepts are contained in Jesus' first sermon. The time is fulfilled. Be transformed. A distinction must be made between apocalyptic and eschatological interpretations of the crisis. Apocalyptic interpretations understand the crisis as a final crisis, as a cosmic war of good and evil. This approach is typical of communism. The hymn Internationale sings of the last battle, of the Catholic traditionalists and their ideology of culture wars, and of populist politicians. Jesus warned against the apocalyptic enthusiasts of his time. Do not believe them and do not follow them. He advised patience, vigilance, careful discernment. The fanaticism of revolutionaries and inquisitors cannot distinguish wheat from tares. Fanaticism is incapable of distinguishing values. For the Christian faith, the last battle and the last judgment is an eschatological event. The crises in the midst of history are but steps on the way to this eschatological goal. They are opportunities, kairos, for purification, for maturation, for turning metanoia from surface to the depths. Second, value systems are cultural paradigms that change throughout history. We can call them pillars of certainty. In times of crisis, in times of changing cultural paradigms, these pillars of certainty collapse. During the Enlightenment, the system of certainties based on tradition and authority collapsed. In our time, the great value system of the Enlightenment has collapsed too, especially the optimism of progress, the confidence that scientific rationality and the modern technology will protect man from global crises such as terrorism, financial crisis, climate change, and pandemic of contagious diseases. The notion that we can return to the certainties of the past, to pre-modern religiosity or to modern confidence in a one-sided civilization of growth are naive and dangerous illusions. New paths must be sought, and in this search, Christianity can play a very important role. Third, but it can only be Christianity that undergoes a profound reform. The pathological forms of Christianity is nostalgia for the pre-modern Christianitas. Christianity is a political ideology of populists and nationalists. The church is a closed clerical system of power. Fundamentalism is an arrogant claim to monopoly ownership of truth are but shadows of a dead God. Christianity is undergoing two shocks at this time. A crisis of confidence, triggered by the pandemic of sexual, psychological, and spiritual abuse, and the crisis of the normal functioning of churches in coronavirus pandemic. Both of these crises are kairos, a rare opportunity to seek new paths. Four, the image of God and the image of man are inseparably linked. Nietzsche showed the consequences brought about by the death of a certain image of God and the related disappearance of a certain type of man. His vision of the Superman, Übermensch, the free creator of new values, remained unfinished and was therefore often misunderstood and misused. The courageous thinker who attempts to integrate this intuition into his original vision of Christianity as a key element in the cosmic evolution was Teilhard de Chardin. Teilhard, too, often uses the prefix over, Iber, super, speaking of a superhumanity. I see analogies between Teilhard's vision of Christianity for the planetary age, in other words, for the age of culminating globalization, and the call for universal fraternity contained in Pope Francis' encyclical Fratelli Tutti. I consider Fratelli Tutti to be the most important document of our time, a vision of a broadly ecumenically open Christianity, towards which the synodal way, the synodal process, towards the reform of the Church should be directed. 5. The modern vision of the human person has been criticized for its lack of transcendence. Christianity knows three interrelated forms of transcendence, the three ways of liberating the human ego from the prison of self-centeredness. Faith hope, and love. Religious transcendence, man's relationship to God, is incarnated in Christianity in the relationship to fellow human beings. Our solidarity of love for others is theophany, the place of God's self-revelation. He who does not love does not know God, says the scripture. The temptation of not only personal, but also collective egocentrism, self-centeredness, and narcissism must be fought. The dangerous manifestation of collective selfishness is nationalism, national selfishness. We must not allow populists and nationalists to threaten the unity and solidarity of Europe and risk the political and economic suicide of European nations. A Christian cannot be a nationalist, says Pope Francis. Solidarity with other nations in the family of Europe, seeking common solutions to major crises such as care of refugees, the ecological crisis, the globalization of extremism, and the pandemic of contagious diseases, is a test of the maturity and genuineness of our Christianity. It is not only a political, but also a cultural, spiritual, and moral task of our time. We must not allow populists and nationalists to misuse the terminology, symbols, and moral energy of the Christian religion as an instrument for their power interests. We must not allow them to discredit the Church and Christianity. It is our duty to show a different face of Christianity. Sixth and last, this other face of Christianity is a deeper and wider ecumenism, a through Catholicity of Christianity. It is not only about Christian unity and interreligious dialogue. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis shows yet another dimension of ecumenism, universal, pan-human fraternity. The Church, too, must free itself from the collective narcissism and self-centeredness, clericalism, and triumphalism. The Church is a sacrament, that is, an effective symbol, signum efficiens, of the unity of all humanity in God through the universal love of Jesus Christ. This unity is our eschatological goal. We need a humble distinction between the Church in the midst of history, communio viatorum, and a complete unity in the arms of God. We cannot mixture this vision of the Ecclesia triumphans in heaven with the contemporary situation of the Church. It would be this. It would be triumphalism, but we must acknowledge that we are on the way, just on the way, communio viatorum. But in the midst of history, precisely through the experiences of crisis, we must awaken the courage to take further steps on this path. Thank you.
Dziękujemy księdzu profesorowi za ten
Reverend Professor, thank you very much for your introduction to our discussion. And I would like to invite now to our discussion
Jerzego Samca z Wierzchnika
Bishop Jerzy Samiec, head of the Evangelical Augsburg Church in Poland,
prezesa
until recently head of the Polish Ecumenical Council.
ojca Manuela Barrios Prieto,
Reverend Manuel Barrios Prieto, Spanish Jesuit, doctor in
też sekretarza generalnego,
theology, philosophy, Secretary General of the Komisji.
sekretarza generalnego,
Reverend Prieto, Secretary General of the
przewodnika
Komisji.
kardynał Hollerich, którego przed chwilą słyszeliśmy.
We heard words of Cardinal Hollerich before, also for Komisji, and the third guest is Massimo Sinifredi,
Polski piszącego,
friend of Poland, who writes about Poland, Polish history, the history of church in Poland.
jednego z współtwórców organizacji,
One of the, how shall I call it, one of the co-organizers of St. Egido community, Comunità San Egido,
w 1968 roku
set up in 68
listy Andrea Riccardi
by Andrea Riccardi, a secondary school student at that time.
w Tygodniku Powszechnym i warto do niego wrócić. I
There's been recently an interview with him in Tygodnik Powszechny,
świętego Idziego,
but this San Egidio community, Massimiano Sinifredi,
migrantami,
deals with migrants, homeless, refugees, helping those who need our assistance.
także świadectwo
So I think that his testimony, what he will be able, I think, to contribute to the discussion is going to be very valuable.
przed ponad 50 laty Hannah Arendt
Over 30 years ago, Hannah Arendt wrote that the objective of historical analysis is to find the sources of modern alienation of human being, alienation from the world.
z ziemi
Two forms of escape, perhaps, from the earth to the space and from the world into
celem jest,
your own I, ego.
które możemy obserwować
It's very much about trying to understand the nature of the society.
i jeszcze nieznanej.
A new epoch perhaps is coming, arriving. Those words come from 1958, actually. Let me start perhaps today our discussion
Zastanowienia się właśnie nad
with an attempt to try to think about the questions that were posed already decades ago about the vision of the human being.
rolę i misję
How
człowieka,
can we define the role and the mission of the human being,
absolutyzacji ego.
especially in the context of this attempt to make one's ego one's absolute, something absolute value. Professor Halik spoke about that. Perhaps there is a need to overcome one's ego to meet God, or to meet another human being. How to define, therefore, the role and the mission of the human being in this context, especially in the context of this narcissism of the contemporary world, perhaps. How to help humans become
Na Boga i
sensitive to God and sensitive to the needs of others. Can I start perhaps with Bishop Samiec? Bishop, the floor is yours.
przepraszam jeszcze będę
I'm sorry, still, let me draw your attention to time limits. So I'm going to ask you simply to keep your comments to some time limits. We've got roughly 90 minutes for the whole session, but I understand there will be many questions to be discussed. Yes, thank you very much. A lot to speak about, but first of all, let me thank you for your invitation, for making it possible for me to participate in this conference and especially be one of the speakers during the first panel session. As you all know, we speak about Christians, their role when faced with the crisis. And a number of questions have been posed. I think some answers have been already presented in the introductory speeches. The times are changing, the contexts in which we live keep changing, and certainly from the Polish perspective, the situation of an individual, a single person, was very much different. In 1980s, early 1980s or 1970s also, the Znak magazine was created at that time. And today, 30 years after political economic changes in this part of Europe, the situation is very much different. There is also a big difference I can see between my generation, the time when we were young, going to schools, and another generation 10, 15, 20 years younger, because I can see that they are more open, they know foreign languages, they established very easily relations with others, they travel a lot, know many people. We lived in a different world, more closed off from the outside world. But apart from the changes that are occurring, and certainly will keep on occurring, but I think that we as people, humans, always have the same needs. And we sooner or later ask questions about who we are, where we are going, what the sense of our life is. And then, depending on the answers to those questions, we take different approaches to our life. Well, if one is not a philosopher or sociologist or religion, and I'm a more practitioner, not really a philosopher or sociologist, but what is important, I think, in the Church, I speak not from the perspective of the Roman Catholic Church, but the universal Church, if you can put it like this. What matters is to try to find the way in which we can find answers to the questions that we pose, we as humans. I think we as humans have always been egoistic. We love our ego, but what is very important, I think, from the Christian point of view, is to be able to relate to what has been given to us by our Master, Jesus Christ. He made it clear. You have to abandon yourself if you want to follow me. He was saying it very clear. If you want to follow me, if you want to be my disciple, you have to overcome your ego. And I think it's especially love. Love is very important. Love, hope, faith. We can refer, of course, to the Bible and also to the writings of the disciples. We need to love others. True love to God, I think, also means that we love as a result others, other people, and this true love of another individual, it, in my view, shapes our life and the way we behave. When we think about Europe now, about our values, but also the crises we are facing in Europe, well, my personal comment would be, not mine only, I think, others will share perhaps those ideas, but from the recent days, weeks and months, I would say that the current refugee crisis shows to us that we really love ourselves only by building walls, closing borders, not letting people who need help into our countries, but we say the borders, the walls have to be there, they have to be protected. Well, in fact, we show very clearly that we love ourselves, we love our well-being, we want to live comfortably in the European Union or the United States or Canada. You can list, of course, many countries here. We want to protect ourselves from others who want to enter our paradise as if. And I think this is the way in which our ego represents itself and manifests itself. We use very often Christian language, but if this love to those who are in need of help is not seen, is not manifested, these are just empty words. And again, referring to Jesus Christ, his words, if you want to meet me, you can meet me in prisons, in hospitals where I need care. And I think today we could also mention here those knocking at our doors for many different reasons, of course. Even if sometimes there are economic reasons for them to migrate, to knock at our European doors. But here in the Polish context, I think that the economic context, as we all know, was the reason why millions of Poles left Poland after we joined the EU. They traveled to other countries, or in the previous decades they traveled often to the United States also for economic reasons. But I think we have to again remember about the words of Jesus Christ, the love of God, and this should also be manifested and presented to others, other individuals, other humans. Thank you very much, Bishop. I think Massimiliano Sinifredi will tell us more on that. I'm looking forward to his comments because I understand that these are the problems that San Egidio community is dealing with on an everyday basis.
Ja dziękuję za zaproszenie.
Thank you for the invitation.
Będę mówić po polsku.
I will speak Polish.
Postaram się mówić po polsku.
I'll give it a try anyway.
Dziękuję.
Thank you.
Jestem szczególnie wdzięczny, że uczestniczę
I'm especially
w konferencji,
thankful
która jest organizowana przez Fundację
because
Pieronka.
I can participate in a conference that is organized by Bishop Pieronik's foundation, and I cherish his memory. It's a blessing because it's very closely linked to the subjects that we're discussing today. Christian Europe was a vision of his, after all.
Zacząć od
So where shall I begin? With the following
ładnie przetłumaczone
quote,
przez profesor
beautifully translated by Professor
czyli
Alik.
słowa mistrza Eckharta, który
Meister Eckhart's words, namely,
zabić ego.
you need to kill your ego.
Parafrazować.
I would like to paraphrase it, though. You need to kill your ego so that humanity can keep on living.
Doświadczenie COVID-19.
And COVID-19 is an experience that leads us there. It deeply has changed our lives.
Egoistycznej i
Because
wszechmocy,
there was this egoistic, predatory sense of power, and now we see that it's not good when people are alone. A quote from Genesis, the beginning of humanity.
od ja do my.
So we need to move from I, from self, to us, to we.
Uważa pandemię za
How to surely too many people think that the pandemic is just like a set of brackets. Once they're done, you can return to normality, to the old normal.
już nie ma.
The
Mamy
patriarch said, the old world is gone. In our hands, we have this opportunity to build a new beginning, kairos,
nowego początku, które może być
this new start, and we can embark on it only together.
meta.
So, kairos, misa, with.
Wypowiedziane kilka dni temu na
And
spotkaniu
these words were said a few days ago. It was this meeting organized by St. Egilio's community,
ukazują
brotherly
chwili,
lens.
nowy początek
And it shows that the new beginning can be achieved when we work together. The pandemic is a global phenomenon, and it showed how fragile all of us are. It showed that to live in this global world, you must not be
ale jest
alone.
potrzebna pomoc.
What is needed first is some assistance, help, community, family. We is needed first.
Nie jest dobra, nawet jeśli
And we saw how loneliness or being alone is bad, even if you call it freedom or individualism.
papież Franciszek
Pope Francis has said, I mean, he said in March 2020 at St. Peter's Square, it was a prayer,
obrotach
and we
czują się
started going to the West. We feel strong, we feel like super people, like supermen.
potrzebujemy pomocy.
But now we know that we need help.
Kraj jest wzięci Unii Europejskiej.
All of our countries are grateful to the European Union. And now we understand that the European Union is needed just for that. The EU has set up a plan for reconstruction so that we can live better. There is also a hope for the whole world now.
Ale papież powiedział również,
Now, the Pope also said,
wołania
we
ubogich,
never listened to the calls of the poor
chorej planety.
and to the calls of our planet, which is really sick. We were not moved, and we thought that we would continue to be healthy in this sick world. And I was struck how these words coincide with this message of a great European, Jonathan Sachs, a rabbi, recently deceased. He was a master of human and Jewish wisdom. So he said, in the world, what happened was a cultural climate change. There was a shift from we to I. What's the impact of that change? The politics of divisions, unjust economy, a loss of our open-mindedness, and an increase in drug addiction. Societies are divided, they accept exclusion. This politics of I denies democracy and brings it down to the level of confrontation. All the social bonds for quite some time have been broken and getting looser. There is this fall of social life, and Robert Putnam, this American sociologist, defined it as pulling alone. So loneliness is this sad experience of all Europeans, millions of Europeans. In the UK, they created this ministry for loneliness, and that showed this major problem that Europe is facing, namely, it is social isolation. Younger and older people are suffering from that, and also it results from a significant deterioration of the quality of life, and also then when you're suffering from a disease. You see various pathologies. 33% of families in Europe consist of a single person. What kind of a family is that? 3%, or rather closer to half, these are older people. It is a sign of an anthropological crisis, and we are deep in this crisis. Our lives are getting longer, but we also are going towards lonelihood, and sometimes we die in segregation, in isolation, and it happened to thousands of people. It was a tragedy in various care homes during the pandemic. Do I have a minute more? Half a minute. Okay. Let me comment on the words of Bishop Sands. What is the European identity? Or what is it going to be like once we have rebuilt walls? We are Christians. For us, it means nothing. What we need to do is to come up with a solution in the spirit of cooperation with the European institutions. I mean the community that we belong to. Thank you very much, Massimiliano.
I zapraszam
May I ask Father Manuel
do
to take the floor?
komentarza.
Could you comment?
Także z doświadczeniem osoby kiedyś
Because you once were responsible for the chaplaincy of families in Madrid. Also, you have this significant experience in ecological dialogue.
So it's a pleasure to be here this morning in this beautiful city of Cracovia. Have come walking, a very nice day. I'm very pleased to be invited here to this conference. I was here 2 years ago before the COVID, a few weeks before the elections here in Poland, and now we have this meeting again. From COMISE, from the Commission of the Bishops' Conference of the European Union, we are 3 of us here today. There's Bishop Antoine Roy. He's celebrating Mass this afternoon, and he's intervening tomorrow on the ecological transition or the ecological crisis. He's Bishop in Lille, and he's also the President of the Commission on Social Affairs of COMISE. We also have Marek, our expert in external relations of the European Union. Marek Pisak. I greet you all. I greet Roberta Metsola, Vice President of the European Parliament, Jan Olbricht, a friend of Commissaire, and the rest of you. So I think I have only 5 minutes to answer your first question. But I wanted to a short introduction because I was thinking about the words to say. And I think one has to start with the title of this meeting today. So the whole series of conferences, I think we celebrated 20 years, no? 2 years ago of these conferences here. The first title was Role of the Church in the Process of European Integration. And this is quite an interesting title for us, people of the Church. What is the role of the Church as such in the European integration? Then there's been a change. Now the title of these conferences is Role of the Christians in the Process of European Integration as Christians. And I'm very happy also of what MEP Jan Albrecht was saying before, of this openness to ecumenism, to other Christian churches, and also this openness to interreligious dialogue. I think this is very important. Europe is Catholic, is Christian, has Christian roots, was said before by Cardinal Horridge, but Europe has also other religious traditions in its midst, and other churches. And this in Central and Eastern Europe, the Orthodox Church and the Orthodox tradition and Oriental churches are very important. So the title of this meeting instead in this series of the process of the role of Christians in European integration is the crisis. So the title is of this meeting, Christians of Europe in the Face of Crisis. And we have 3 crises that we're going to discuss. So this first crisis is the crisis of values and an anthropological crisis. How man perceives himself, herself. What is our way of seeing ourselves? It's interesting, we had our plenary assembly in Commissaire on Wednesday and on Thursday. It finished yesterday afternoon. And we had a very interesting conference from Herman Van Rompuy. He was a former president of the European Council, a Belgian politician. And he told us the European of 1957 is not the same as the European of 2021. He started his conference with these words. I think this is interesting to think. Is the European the same in these 70 years? Or has there been a radical change of the European in these years? So, we are going to consider this crisis, and I liked very, very much what Professor Halleck said at the beginning. We have to understand the word crisis. Sometimes we understand it in a negative way. I'm in crisis. I'm in a crisis. Europe is now in a crisis, and we're living it here in Poland with a lot of strength, with this of the Constitutional Court, the sentence, and now this chamber and this new sentence of the European Court of Justice with €1 million a day and so on. So, crisis. Does crisis mean that it's something only negative? Or is crisis also an opportunity, as Professor Halleck was saying before? Is it a kairos, the word kairos, a moment of change, a moment of going not worse, but going better? And we know that Europe really grew, really changed in crisis time. And we know that phrase of Chesterton, very famous, never lose a good crisis. Never let it escape a good crisis. So if this is a moment of crisis, it's a moment also, if we live it well, And if we live it with discernment, this was said also, this Jesuit tradition of discerning the spirit of the times, of seeing in a Christian way where the Spirit is taking us. So discerning what we have to do. Where is this crisis taking us? So said this, I wanted to answer the question. That's a bit what is said. So I think there has been a change in the way, as in that quotation I gave of Herman Van Rompuy Wednesday, in a meeting in Brussels. There has been a change in the way the human person conceives himself or herself in these last years. What are the causes of this change? Well, I think one, and Pope Benedict XVI has said this, and also Andrea Riccardi, the founder of Sant'Egidio, has said it in a famous book he just published on the church burning. He says that a real important change in Europe was the sexual revolution in 1968. So this, politically it was lost, but culturally this revolution won. It's been a change in the idea of authority. Now authority is challenged, not only of the father and the mother, of the teacher, of the politician, of the priest. We have seen it also with this vaccine issue, that a lot of people don't trust the health system, and they say, no, I don't believe in this. No, I don't want to get vaccinated. It's dangerous. And also people that are not badly educated. So a crisis in authority, I would say. A change in sexuality and the way of living sexuality. This happened in 1968 and beyond. And now we have also the technological digital transition. Genetic engineering. So all this makes us think of what is really the human being. What is really the human being? And I think, and that was to answer your question, I think there are four givens in our human nature that are the basis. And then even if there have been changes, these givens things are there and cannot be taken away. One of this is transcendence. We say man is made in the image and likeness of God. Man is open to transcendence. Man is constitutionally open to the mystery of God. So this is the first giving of human nature. The second is a call to community and fraternity. I think we have within ourselves this call, this need of being with others, of sharing, of communion, of fraternity. And I think as Christians, what the gospel tells us is that we have to go beyond natural borders. So my neighbor is not only my family, not only my tribe, not only my nation, but I have to go beyond. I am brother and sister of every human being. So a call to community and a call to fraternity. I think that forms part of our human nature. Another thing I would say forms part of our human nature, and this has been also taught us by Pope Francis, not in the Fratelli Tutti that was quoted, and I think it is right. What Professor Alex said is, I think it's a very, very important document, maybe one of the most important documents of the magisterium of the last years. But also an encyclical letter before, Laudato Si, tells us that we live interconnected with the world. So we are responsible for the common home. So this forms part also of our nature. We are in a world. And I think the fourth given of our human nature, and here I know this can open a big discussion. And in Europe, this discussion is very alive. A fourth given, a fourth characteristic of our human nature is sexual difference. We are man and woman. And this is there. Huh? So, answering your question, transcendence. We are losing transcendence. I think transcendence is a given we have. So it's there. We can maybe ignore it. We can maybe act as if it weren't there. We can even rebel ourselves against our transcendence, but we cannot take it away.
Thank you. Dziękuję bardzo. Za odpowiedź na...
Thank you very much for answering the question that has been posed. I also encourage all participants to participate in discussion. There will be time for questions and comments between the different issues that we are raising here. Now, still drawing on what has been said, it seems to me that sometimes we speak about crises and in a way we try to move away from them, shift them away. But let us remember that most of the crises are the result of the work of men. We try to make some of the processes objective, move them away somehow. But now how can we find inside answer to crisis, what we can do when faced with the crisis, not to make them deeper, or perhaps how can we help correct what has gone wrong in our societies, in our understanding of the role that we play, we as humans, or perhaps to mend what has gone wrong, what has been broken perhaps in the societies, institutions, or natural environments. Ladies and gentlemen, anyone in the room now, I'm opening it up. Would anyone like to refer or add to what has been said here before, or ask for the floor in this part of our discussion, or perhaps questions to our speakers? Any comments from the room now? Nobody? Right, but of course there will be a chance again after another round that we are going to have here. Right. We are witnessing different discussions. We speak about different crises, referring to what Reverend Professor Tomasz Halik referred to, also Bishop Summit. We focus on us, on ourselves, more and more. We heard that this results in divisions in societies, and leads from democracy to destruction, perhaps, of democratic systems. Can I ask the following question? Again, the question to our guests. How should we understand in the contemporary world the message from the Sermon on the Mount, the need to be close to those who are in need? Can it help us perhaps overcome our ego and to be more open to the needs of others? Cardinal Hollerich, for instance, to give you an example, when the big migration crisis started, actually he made his residence in Luxembourg to families of migrants. He very literally actually had migrant families living in his bishop's quarters to help them. How today in our societies, in practical terms, how can we understand perhaps the message of Jesus Christ? Massimiliano, perhaps you can start off speaking about your experience, the San Gino community. Thank you. It was not only Cardinal Hollerich, but also Cardinal Krajewski made actually his apartment in Borgo Pio available to a family of migrants from Syria, from Aleppo. Thanks to some humanitarian corridors, they reached Italy 4 years ago. And the experience of this hospitality, hosting refugees, I think this also this experience renews our church. And when in 2015, when we had the first wave of the refugee crisis, and most of them coming from Syria, the Pope visited Lesbos, as you know, and he brought back 12 refugees. This shows how the refugee crisis and the way in which we treat refugees, how it gives us perhaps a chance to integrate, gives new also opportunities to our churches. I would like to focus in what I'm saying on the problem that I very often can see in the world of the young generation especially, but not only, virtual world and virtual relationships. Very often those relationships are not real. We are linked. Our relations are the strongest to those who are right next to us. In the virtual world, it seems that we can reach to everyone, but this has consequences about also responsibility, because when things are virtual, they're not concrete. What is quite a worrying aspect that I now observe, and this was seen during the pandemic. What I mean here is the conspiracy theories and different fake news, and they're spreading in the virtual world. For instance, about the origin of COVID-19 and the threats related to the vaccines. In the globalized world, in the virtual world, we are flooded with information. We become very often prisoners of the media bubble, as I would call it. In the network, the whole system of virtual groups, likes, it only usually confirms what we think we already understand. It's more difficult to find other opinions. Very often we read not to learn or to better understand, but to find a confirmation of our own truth. This is the current approach. And this post-truth is a certain monologue, while truth is about dialogue. Dialogue between yourself and the surrounding reality. It's built in the relationship to the world, to others, to history. So if we open our arms to the refugees, we do something good, but also as a result we understand better what it means to live in the 21st century. And every one of us, we should realize, might potentially be a refugee. When towards the end of August, our San Egidio community, but also other communities, when we hosted Afghans from Kabul, I personally hosted a professor of Kabul University, a colleague, you might say, university colleague. So in this way, we can understand what personal meeting is about and how we, as Christians, should be faithful to the gospel and to host those who are in need. Let me go back perhaps to the main subject of our discussion here. I think that this movement from I to us, instead of saying I myself, we should be able to say more often we, us. In Italy or in Poland, in Europe, when you speak about those excluded, those who are poor, those who have no perspectives for the future, or when we speak about the elderly treated as a burden that we have to deal with, in this context, I think we should always speak we, us. Also, when speaking about migrants, about refugees, we should be able to say we, to focus on what we have in common. Manuel Prieto quoted Laudato Si encyclical. In this encyclical, the Pope said that we have to free ourselves from isolating our conscience, and added that if we are able to overcome individualism, only then can we come up with an alternative style of life, and only then is it possible to change our society in a considerable way. When we overcome our individualism, the world starts to change. This might be considered a recipe, perhaps, for the new beginning after the pandemic. I'm not sure whether I referred exactly to what you asked. I'm not sure whether your expectations have been fulfilled by what I said, but I think this movement from I to us, this is going to be repeated perhaps many times. Yes, thank you very much. I think you did it very well, because this was one of the questions about how to remember about those human links, relations with also different communication tools that in fact in the virtual world seem that we are close, but we are atomized, we are far from the others, difficult to understand. Bishop Summit, would you like to add to what has been said here? You're welcome. Thank you very much. It is my impression that there are a number of subjects we are discussing here. We are moving from different threats to others, speaking about different crises as well. It was, I admit, very interesting to say that you should never waste a good crisis. Excellent comment, actually. Yes, we have to think about how to use the different challenges, the crises, how to use them for the good. There's been some discussion about refugees. I had the privilege to be in Jordan some time ago in a refugee camp. I was delegate of the World Lutheran Federation, where we were assisting people in the refugee camp in Jordan. And if I may, I would like to share with you some of my experiences from that stay. First of all, we were told that we should not speak about those people as refugees because they have their names, first names, family names, and once we start saying refugees appeared on the border, refugees, repeating this name, in a way we push away individuals, individual faces. My colleague here said that he had a professor from Afghanistan staying in his place in Warsaw. We are helping different families. There's a couple elderly people, medical doctor, old lady, and a pharmacist, actually, a man, but they are not able to work in Poland because they've got problems. Simply, their diplomas are not recognized in Poland, but they are specialists, they've got their dreams, they've got their plans, and I think that we have to see them always with a face, their name as an individual. In Poland, we have noticed how deeply we were moved when we saw pictures of small children pushed back across the border to Belarus. When we see especially a face of a child, we even had a case in which the wife of the current president, the first lady, she traveled to the border areas here in Poland to make it clear that we have to help the children there. Now going back to Jordan, in the camp where I stayed, there was a clear majority of Muslims, while most of the people helping are Christians, not all of course, but most of them. And they were asking actually, and the help was not about running Bible meetings or running church meetings, but it was very much about just human help. And the Muslims were often asking, why do you do that? Why are you helping us at all? And they were as if started to find God that is God of love, not God of war, because we simply, well, we don't want to fight, we want to live in peace. So I think this also shows the way in which we have to approach others. I'm sorry for repeating perhaps that, but in Poland, unfortunately, very often, or at least I see it, this is my personal experience, maybe it's easier for me to see it because I am not part of the majority church, not Catholic Church, but there are many with beautiful words, uttering beautiful words, but at the same time, when they speak out to protect the church, message of the Bible and Christ, and at the same time they are aggressive. They have a baseball bat in their hand very often when they utter such beautiful words. Another issue that has been raised, the internet. I have to say that my generation, maybe we have some fears with regard to the internet, but our friends, young generation, they treat the internet as something natural. This is part of their everyday life. And now the pandemic, COVID-19, actually resulted, as you know, in the fact that our churches became more and more digital, virtual meetings were more and more common. And now there are many theological questions, communion, participation in the Eucharist. The Catholic Church has asked many questions. It's a bit different in the Protestant Church, but can you really recognize that someone participates in the Eucharist when it's done online only? The world is changing, I think, very quickly. But isn't it an opportunity, perhaps, a chance for us to use those new tools to bring churches closer to the people? Well, we have been forced, we have been compelled to do that when before the recent Easter, churches were closed for the Polish faithful, for the Protestant church, especially the Good Friday is a very special day. We have the communion. I know it's different in the Catholic Church. I wouldn't like to speak about theological issues and the differences between the different denominations, who can give communion to whom, but it was a big problem for us, again, the closing of the churches before Good Friday. And the world certainly is going to change. This is a general comment. The young generation is spending more and more time online, and I think we should not fight those changes, but to recognize perhaps what is changing and to use them as new tools. Thank you very much.
You could now comment on it, how to recognize the signs of a new era to come and how to be actor of the future and not only the commentator of the future.
Yes, I could do that, but I'll do that, but I'll prefer keeping a bit to what was said here, because I think these issues that have been commented are quite important. For example, on the refugee and migrant crisis, if we want to call it like this, I think it's important to have our principles clear as Christians. So I would say that's the most important thing. And that means to be aware, be conscious, acknowledge the dignity of every human person. This, I think, is fundamental. Then I think it's important to acknowledge and to accept, I would say, let's start with the most simple, that people that are persecuted, we have to help them. People that are at risk of their lives because of their religion, because of their orientation, whatever, they have the right to asylum. Thirdly, I think we have to acknowledge that a person that is dying at sea, we have to rescue him. So the basic sort of principles for all Christians. Now, this said, I think we have to have clear, then, as Komis said, we work much on this, there is a translation that has to be done between these principles and European policies. And sometimes this is not difficult, this is not easy. It becomes a question of negotiation, it becomes a question sometimes also of an electoral question when some countries are facing elections and there's a very strong populist government or populist party on this issue, no? So there are considerations that have to be taken into consideration. Sorry for the repetition. These are things that have to be considered. No? We have now in the European Union, proposed by the Commission in last September, this pact on migration and asylum. No? Now it's a bit blocked, so maybe it's a step to try and solve this important issue. So I would say, as Catholic Church, on one side we have to be prophetic and denounce, defend the dignity of the human person, be strong, have a strong voice. On the other hand, and that's the mission of Komis, we have to follow European policies and see the way we can contribute to them from a Christian standpoint, from a Christian point of view. So that I would say on the issue of migration and asylum. And then now we are living this in Poland. There's the geopolitical issue that sometimes also these poor persons are used for political reasons. So this has to also make us react, I think. And I forgot your question. No, another question.
We'll get back to that.
I think it's important. And it was your first real question. The second question is on technology, that this has separated us. I think we don't have to be afraid of all this. We have to be educated to know how to live with this and to use it well. And we've experienced in the COVID pandemic how this has been important to keep our meetings, keep our works, keep us in contact. So I'm not afraid of this. I think we have to learn how to use it well. What I say as church, and I say this also for the European Union, I think it's very important for us as Catholic Church, and I think other churches as well, to recover a spirit of community. Because this helps us as persons. We need community. We need to gather with others and celebrate. So internet cannot substitute this. And we know it also in our meetings. Our meetings when we meet physically like we did with the bishops this week is much different than when we met by Zoom. There's a very big difference in this. So, sense of community, gathering together. And this is the church. This is the church.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much. I've stood up to take a look at the room. Father Igor is there. The Greek Catholic Church. The Greek
To bliżej do mikrofonu.
Catholic Church. I'll try to speak Polish. So human crises. Any religious person has some kind of reference to one confession or another. So I've been listening to Reverend Professor Halik about ecumenism and this ecumenic dimension of things. And what popped up to my head is a question. Is there a crisis of confession in Europe, the West and in the East? People tend to move away from confession in the traditional sense. Here, the majority are Catholics, Roman Catholics, right? But I would like to also hear from others. Christians in Europe is the subject of this conversation. I've been to Berlin recently. What did I hear there? It is quite likely that soon we will not say that somebody belongs to a church, but rather to Christianity as a whole. So this crisis of confession, the crisis of belonging to any given confession is there. Should something be done about that? Any of the panelists would like to speak on that? Father Manuel.
Well, this is a very broad question, very broad question. I think on one side it's true that, and this is the crisis of authority that I mentioned before, I think churches have lost credibility. The Catholic Church has lost credibility, obviously, and this is important. And then I think there's a tendency also for people to have like a private religion or to choose the things they like from their tradition, but to have it a bit privately, not to be part, not to think they belong to a community. I think that's true as well. And obviously we have secularism in Europe, some countries more, some countries less. This is true. But I think also this can be lived as a kairos. for the churches to think about themselves, think what they have to change. We in the Catholic Church have this synod on synodality that has started. That starts from the ground level, from grassroots, and it goes up to see how people want the church. So also the church has to change a bit. There is also, yesterday I was a bit joking on this. It's very similar to the Conference on the Future of Europe. There's a similarity on this. Because the Conference on the Future of Europe is an instrument to engage citizens with the European institutions and to think together what Europe we want. And it's done, I think, in a very scientific way. We have a platform, people are intervening in this platform, so it's like it's not representative, obviously. If you see the things, it's not very representative because only a few people, even if there are 4 million sort of likes and interactions with this platform, only 4 million people have done out of the 500 million that are Europeans. But it's also good as a brainstorming because the ideas that are coming up are very interesting. Then we have the panels, citizen panels that are more representative. So there we have a certain scrutiny of all this that has come through in the platform. And then we'll have the assembly. And we hope that then at the end we get to some conclusion. So this is the Conference on the Future of Europe. And the synod is a bit the same. It starts in diocese, then it goes to the regional level. The regional level of Europe will be important then to see what church we want. So also the church, I think, has to live this kairos. That's why, I don't know if I answered your question. More or less.
Massimiliano, a potem biskup Samiec.
Króciutko.
Very briefly.
Jan Paweł II lubił
John Paul II liked to talk about the ecumenism of love.
To doświadczamy teraz w Europie.
It is something that we here in Europe have been experiencing. We're talking about this. We have those humanitarian corridors, right? So how do we accept migrants, refugees? It is not just a European phenomenon.
Łączy różne kościoły.
It is something that connects a number of different churches. In Italy, we cooperate with this Confederation of Protestant churches. In Belgium, Christian and Jewish communities have joined in too. So it is more than just ecumenism, it is an interreligious dialogue. We're talking about particular things, particular issues here that we work on.
Ograniczeniu i fakcie, że istnieje kryzys.
So there is this confessional crisis in Europe. Let us remember that we have a war in Europe. There is a war going on in Ukraine.
Myślę, że religie są bohaterami tej wojny.
I would say that religions are being used in this war. What about Christians? Christians need to give a display of unity. When they do something good for others, they unite, they come together. Because this is what people who have taken in migrants have experienced. It's just a drop, naturally. But if it's 4,000 people that are being welcomed, it's more than just a drop, it's significant. I'll try to be brief, even though I may find it difficult. So I represent a minority here, and I've been basically asked to respond to that. It's hard to imagine, but there is a church that here in Poland we have 63,000 members. Over 70,000 claim that they belong to our church. This is what we can see in the statistics. But then a child goes to a kindergarten, and there are religious education classes there, and then there is primary school, the first year, the second year, and in the Roman Catholic Church you have a communion, and our children need to be explained why they do not participate in this ritual together with their friends who are Roman Catholics, and we need to discuss what their identity is, what being an evangelical is. You might have one, maybe three such people in a school. When there are three, well, that's quite a lot. At times you have just one such child in a given school. So how is it going to be treated? It will largely depend on people who teach religion in such a school. And quite often, those teachers do quite well and they have the right stance. But we are a minority, and thus our identity is shaped, but also our sense of being separate from this majority that surrounds us. It could lead to a behavior that is similar to that in a ghetto. We could consider ourselves a very exclusive group. We might feel better than others, maybe because we know the scripture better, or that we are more hardworking. We basically look for things that would, how shall I say it, set us apart. Basically, we want to praise ourselves. But it might also lead us to feel that we are like in this fortress. We try to defend ourselves. And then we close up, and we lose quite a lot because of that, when that happens. I've been a bishop for 12 years now. So let me tell you that when we open up to others, we gain a lot more. No longer are we afraid that you will have a lack of confessionists, or rather this sense of belonging to a given religion. No, we're no longer afraid of that. And let me follow up on what we heard before. I believe it was the year 2015 or 2016. A politician in Germany divided Germany and the EU. I mean, Madam Chancellor. She said, we will welcome them. We can make it. That's what she said. But then I did not see in her a politician, but rather a Christian. She spoke those words as a person of faith. We can make it. We will take in those who need our help. And her father did something that impacted her acts. Her father had been a reverend, and he moved from the west to the east because he felt that people in the east needed his help. So you could clearly see that stance in her actions. Thank you very much for the fact that you quoted that. Even if you are a politician, you can still show that you are Christian. Father Igor asked a question, and that makes me ask another question to you. So there is this fact that people move from one church to another, they don't feel linked to a given confession. Isn't it just another display of being consumer, that we pick certain things, we pick and choose elements from different churches? We take what we like from here and something else that we like from another church or another confession. It's something that we see on an everyday basis. We pick what we like. It's another example of egocentrism, possibly. Things are supposed to serve us rather than we are supposed to serve others. Is it something that we could discuss here in this group? So how people are consumers and how they are also consumers to some extent when they are members of a group, when they are members of religious communities. Massimiliano? Manuel?
Well, first thing I have to say is we're going to miss Merkel a lot. Huh? So very nice quote, a very nice story of his father and this attitude of hers to not only to search to help migrants and to to manifest hospitality, but also her idea of dialogue and always looking for dialogue. So I want to attribute to her. On the question you were saying about obviously I think there is a personalist way of living religion today that is present in Europe. So people live religion according to what he or she thinks and he or she prefers. I don't think as much the idea of getting from one tradition to another tradition. Maybe there's the idea of getting from Oriental traditions, some kinds of prayers and so on, that does exist. But I think it's just a personal way of living religion, because this authority of the church is challenged, and it's not sometimes very much accepted as such. So I think this will be what I think is happening.
No, naprawdę dotykałeś problem konsumpcjonizmu.
We've touched upon the problem of consumptionism. I said earlier a few comments about the feeling of self-sufficiency. We sometimes feel that we do not need others. But I would like to yet again quote Rabbi Sachs from his book Morality, Reviewing the Common Good. And he writes, I quote here, one of the great lessons of the past, of history, is that societies, communities become strong when they take care about the weak. They get rich when they take care of the poor. They become unassailable when they deal with those who have been defeated. This shows, I think, how processes of building Europe work. We have to remember where we come from. We started on the ruins of the Second World War. We are in Krakow today. We all know that Europe, the united Europe with no conflicts, military conflicts, was created on the ruins of the Second World War and the camps such as Auschwitz. So the world, the project of destruction, built in a way foundation for new Europe. So I think that we need to think about the pandemic as an opportunity, how we can build a better community perhaps coming out of the pandemic. Manuel Prieto earlier referred to Andrea Riccardi, The Church Burns, the book that is going to be published also in Polish, thanks to the work of my friend who is also here in this conference room. And this title, The Church Burns, on the cover you've got Notre Dame Cathedral burning, and you remember many people in France especially, many people were saying, what are we going to do without our cathedral, without Notre Dame? What are we going to do in Europe without the church at large, without the vision of the church? Earlier, Tomasz Halik spoke about what it means to be Christian. I myself have found some words of John Paul II in his message from the Day of the Migrants, 1999, when the Pope said, manifestation of being Catholic is not only brotherhood, community, but also hospitality presented to foreigners, irrespective of their religion, and rejection of all barriers. So this clear vision of open Christianity, not only a certain closed community, but Catholic common, open community. Thank you very much, Massimiliano, for reminding us of those words. I think this leads us to the next question that I was planning to pose. The question is, how should we now relate to those concepts of creating a man of the future without God? Hariri, Homo Deus, for instance, he predicts that man is going to occupy the position of God by intervening in the creation, by genetic engineering, eliminating death, eliminating deficiencies that manifest the weakness of the human being. Can we imagine? How can we act? How can we protect perhaps ourselves against such visions? How can we speak out about life as a gift given to us so that we can use it for the good, not as something that we ourselves can build, construct on our own using engineering, forgetting that our mission is quite different? Who would like to be the first now to refer to this? Yes, please, Bishop. Maybe I will try. Well, when I hear this type of a question that man is going to occupy the position of God, I remember about the Old Testament and the Tower of Babel, man saying that we are going to be like God, we will build a tower up to heaven, and the crisis languages people spread around the world. Yes, you can speak about successes of medicine, and it's good. We need, of course, good medicine. We are perhaps more healthy. We live longer than people did in the past. But then there are crises like the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, and we can suddenly realize how weak we are, what our limitations are. I think that the way in which I perceive the societies of today, it seems to me that in Europe we are closer and closer to the crisis of pride, as I would put it. So we seem to believe that we will always manage, we will overcome all problems, all difficulties. We are very proud. We seem to be richer and richer, and then there are suddenly bombs exploding. We start thinking, why is someone trying to kill others? Why there are some unexpected tendencies suddenly visible? Some focusing on isolation, for instance. Well, we in Poland have gained a lot, and we are still benefiting a lot from our presence in the European Union. When traveling to Krakow from Warsaw, I think today, I saw an excellent motorway, and I remember a few years ago the road was really bad, and we see big changes, excellent roads, and still, in spite of that, there are some tendencies in Poland that we want to isolate ourselves from the rest of the EU. The Second World War, a unique tragedy. Those who experienced the war formed a generation that was trying at all costs to make sure that there would be no another war, no repetition of World War II. They were very humble, I think. They were taught to be humble in their approach to life. Here in Krakow, some university professors, as you know, were imprisoned by the German occupation forces almost overnight. One day university professors, and on the following day almost slaves to a concentration camp. And then I was very often thinking about 1950s, 1960s, how two nations, Germans and Poles, how they were able to work for reconciliation after such difficult past tragedies of the war. And the links established by the bishops, especially also the letter of the Polish bishops, we forgive you and ask for forgiveness. These were bishops who witnessed the Second World War, but still they wanted to work for reconciliation. And again, those who witnessed tragedy of the Second World War. Many spent time in concentration camps. They wanted to work for our better future, to overcome this difficult heritage. I think today what we are witnessing is a crisis of pride, as I said, but as you know, very often pride comes before the fall. So, well, there are often tendencies that can show us perhaps that the future might not be easy. Yes, thank you for reminding us that yes, pride very often comes before the fall. Not only a Polish saying, but from the Bible. But, yes, I admit the Bible, but in Poland very often repeated manual.
Oh, I agree perfectly. This crisis of pride. This is behind what in the Bible is seen as the original sin. Man that wants to become God. Now we have that saying of the devil, if you eat this, if you don't obey, you become like him, knowing good and bad. So this is a temptation to become like God. And this, we know that it's impossible. And if we try to do it, we out to destroy ourselves. So that's the main assumption. We are tempted to become like God, but we can never achieve it. And trying to do so may lead to our destruction. Another consideration I would say is, and this is really something that provokes awe, provokes sort of it makes us sometimes tremble, the power that God has given to man. So God has given man freedom and the possibility of doing many things. Many things. So I think it is important, and I think this, some people might not agree, but it's important that we auto-limit ourselves. We put some ethical limits to what we can do. Because we know that if we do this, we're going to go against humankind. I think this is important. We know this about the nuclear arms and so on, but this might be also valid for scientific investigation and so on. Man has been given by God enormous power to dominate the world, to dominate nature. Man has to learn how to use that power with conscience and respect.
Dziękuję. Thank you.
Massimiliano, would you like to take the floor? I'm also looking around, ladies and gentlemen, any comments from the room? Mr. Dzikowski raising his hand. Microphone, please. Mr. Ambassador, you've been kind enough to compare us to perhaps sheep that are looking for what is good in different religions, rejecting what we don't quite like. But, ladies and gentlemen, maybe it's about consumptionism, but it's very much about looking for the absolute. This is an eminent part of our human nature, because what is the proposal of the church we are part of? What does our shepherd in Krakow tell us? He tells us that we have to be grateful for men, individuals. What kind of language can we hear? Drawing difference between different men in Europe and coming to Europe. Some treat us as little sheep who have no knowledge, who think that they live in the pre-Copernican world. But God would not die on the cross for ordinary sheep. We are not sheep for God. We are important for God, more important than sheep. Maybe we do not all realize that, but the church understood as an institution, a hierarchy perhaps, after the pedophile crisis, after what we are finding out about the deeds of some churches. You know that the churches get empty. In France, many churches are empty. I think we will end up in Poland in the same situation. If the church as hierarchy does not understand this crisis, Well, excuse me if I can interrupt. Let us not speak about the Polish church, but we speak about church in general, higher level. Yes, thank you very much. Massimiliano and then Professor Halik perhaps will be the next to take the floor to share some reflections about what we have been discussing here. Massimiliano first. I give you the floor. Well, Massimiliano, well, the problem of the pandemic, it has shown to us, I think, very clearly that we have to be together. As for the question, Cain asking, am I the guardian to my brother? I'm not sure if I put it properly in Polish. Hopefully you understand what I'm saying. We have to always reply, yes, yes, I am the guardian to my brother. This is the way, I think, the only way in which we can save our world. And thinking about Europe and the values, building the world of the values in Europe, well, certainly in Europe there is a certain cultural problem. Some of us perhaps ask questions about who we are, but the values that lay at the foundation of the construction of this continent after the Second World War, foundation of peace, law, justice. It seems that some of those values are forgotten or maybe not understood here in Europe. But it all depends on us. We are part of Europe. We are Europeans. We are Christians. As Ambassador Tombiński said before, we do not have to objectivize crisis. We are characters playing our role in this context, in the contemporary world, in the crisis. We have to act. We have to ask the question what we can do when faced with the crisis. To conclude, let me quote the words of Don Pino Puglisi, an Italian martyr killed by Sicilian mafia in 1993. He said, if someone is doing something, you can do a lot. So the problem of crisis is very often about being passive, inactive. We have to act. We should not remain passive. And this goes for us and I think our communities.
Massimiliano, thank you for that summary. If everybody's doing something, a lot can be achieved. Professor Halik.
Thank you, dear brothers. I should prefer to say sisters and brothers, but there's a very lack of women voice here. Przeszkoda. Thank you, dear brothers, for your ideas. I have a lot of notes, but I try to be brief. I think we should use this idea of synodality and to deepen it. It's an invitation to the process of common thinking, meditating, studying, bishops, priests, laity, men and women, to think together. And I think we should invite to this process of synodality, the common thinking and to common seeking for a vision for the future, also the other Christian churches and perhaps also the other religions. All the religions need some reformation, not only the Catholic Church. And I think in the history of religion, there are three epochs. One epoch was religion as a religio, as an integrating power of society. It was the medieval Christianitas. It's over. Then was the modern type of religion as a confession. The modernity is fragmentization. And in the modernity, the religion became just one fragment of the life of the society. not something what is the united force as pre-modern religion, but just one sector, and also the religions became made confessions. So there were many confessions, and there was the very unhappy transformation of the Catholic Church and the Catholicism. I had 20 years ago here in Krakow a lecture about from the Catholicism to Catholicity, and now I think it's the end of this period of confessionalism, and perhaps for the future we should have a new type of religion, not as a religere, but a relegere, the relecture, the new hermeneutics, new interpretation, to reinterpretation of our tradition, of the sources like the scripture and the tradition, but also a new hermeneutics, new interpretation of the sign of the time. And we should invite the people from many Christian churches, but also the Jews and Muslims, to relecture of to think, to rethink our tradition, our identity, in the context of the changing world. And I think in Fratelli Tutti there are some impulses for this. Religion as a relecture, as a new hermeneutics, as a new understanding, and to understand the gospel in a new, deeper way, to invite this spiritual reading of the sign of the times and also of our tradition. Then time of the empty churches. I wrote a book which is already in Polish translation, and then I try to understand these empty churches as on one side as a prophetical warning sign. So may looks the church like if there will be no deep reform. So it may be that in 20 years or 10 years, many churches were empty. But on the other hand, it was also an kairos for a new understanding of Eucharisty, and what is my Christian identity if I can't to visit a church. For many people, the Christian identity was just to visit a church on Sunday, and now it was not possible, and there was a chance to rethink what is the pillar of my faith. And some people found it something new, for example, to read and to rethink gospel in the families. In many Catholic families, the member of the families never have speaking about the gospel, about the faith. And now, if there was not possible to go in the church, yes, sometimes the church, okay, everything is just put it on internet, on television, and it will be everything okay. I don't think it is the right way. I think through internet, through electronic media, we can transmit the informations. Yes, the preaching, catechism, but not the Eucharist. Eucharist is celebration. We cannot celebrate online. And so for many people now, some people don't return in the churches and say, I just used to follow the mass in the television and it's okay. But for some Christian families, it was the first opportunity to celebrate Sunday in another, and maybe in the deeper way, they started to speak about their faith, about their experiences of faith, about their doubts, about their good experience, and to read gospel together in the families. There was something very new for those people, and it was the deepening and refreshing of their faith. So although this time of the empty churches was a kairos, was an opportunity, and I think they are in our world, there are many people, there are many Muslims, they are disappointed with the Islam as it is, especially with the Islamist radicalism and so on, and they leave their faith. But very similar, there are many Catholics and many Christians, they are disappointed with the church, especially after this misuse affairs. And what we can offer those disappointed people? Is there any? They will not return in this previous form of Islam or Christianity. We should offer them another deeper form of Islam and Christianity. And I think we should support all the thinkers and the religious leaders and the religious teachers to deepen the spiritual and ethical dimension of the traditions. And it can also to put the religions more together. I don't believe in some religious Esperanto in the religion. This is for everybody, no. But there is a possibility to be in the deeper dialogue and to see the compatibility of our tradition and more friendship and respect and mutual inspiration, because there are also in the Islamic mysticism are many things they could be inspiration for us. And so for Saint Francis of Assisi was the Islam a great inspiration. He saw the Muslims praying 5 a day and said, oh, it's a good idea. And so he started to introduce the Angelus Domini. And so he saw the Muslims are praying something like that. It was, and then it was the beginning of the Rosary. Also, the Crusaders have seen this, and it was. The beginning was a Buddhist, for the Hinduist and the Buddhist, and then the Muslims have something to pray with something like that, and then in the time of Crusaders, the Christians, oh, it's a good idea, and it was the beginning of Rosary. So these great elements of the Catholic tradition, like Angelus Domini and Rosary, have the interreligious roots. So I think there is a chance of mutual inspiration, and perhaps we should to deepen this idea of synodality and to try to put together the open-minded religious leaders, religious teachers. I think Pope Francis have done the first step with this meeting with Al-Azhar, and Fratelli Tutti is the fruit of this very fruitful meeting. So I think it's time for the synodal process in all religions to rethink, because if many believers are disappointed with the traditional Islam or the Islamic extremism, with many Catholics are disappointed with many things in the church, what is the alternative? We cannot to put them back in our institutional and mental boundaries. We should to find a deeper way. And there are many, those nuns, the people, they are answering the question, what is your religion's affiliation, is nonce. It is the third biggest part of the humanity after Christianity and Islam, this nonce. And we should understand those nonce. We start some research project in the Czech Republic because we have so many, these nonce. People say they are atheists. They are absolutely not non-atheists. The minority of them are atheists, but there are people that are apatheists, they are apathetic toward this form of religion. There are some religious seekers. There are some people seeking for the alternative spiritualities. There are some agnostics. There are some anti-clericals. So the very colorful way, this nonce and the future of the Christianity depends on our ability to understand those knowns and to go with them, to accompany them, not just to convert them in the sense to put them, to push them back, but to respect them and to go together in the mutual accompanying. I think sometimes the priests in the seminaries are trained for the service of the dwellers, to convert the converted, or the mission in the classical. I think this classical parish and the classical mission will have not so great future, but an important future is for those who are able to accompany the seekers. And in the mutual respect, I think it will be the main road of the church in the future. I see a little bit the avant-garde of this in the chaplains in the hospitals, chaplains in the prisons, chaplains in the army. The chaplains in the prison are there not only for the pious criminals, they are for all. And in the hospitals, they are not just like the parish priest, he's coming with the Holy Communion for his parishioner. They are for all people to accompany, the spiritual accompaniment. It's broader than just the religious one. The spiritual, it's what is connected with the sense of life, and we should to find the sense of our life and the sense of our life situations, especially in these situations like in prison or in war. But we are all in some dangerous situation, and we need the people that will accompany us and to introduce us to the deeper understanding, this relectier, this religion as a relegere, to read again and deeper our tradition and also the signs of the time. So, that's my idea.
Dziękujemy bardzo profesorowi Tomaszowi Halikowi za
Professor, thank you very much for summing up our discussion. Thank you for your introductory comments. Of course, I think there is no need for me to make an attempt to sum up. I want to thank our panelists. Thank you very much, Reverend Manuel Barrios Prieto, Bishop Jerzy Samec, and Massimiliano Sinifredi. Thank you very much. We are going to have a short lunch break now, and in 1 hour's time at 3:30 we are going to start session 2. Thank you very much.